Everyone, welcome to my monthly Friday Q&A where I answer all of your nutrition related questions with evidence-based information. My name is Taylor Wilcox. I'm a registered dietitian and I help active women improve energy, well-being, and have more confidence in their eating habits without having to diet. And I had a couple of really great questions for this round of the monthly Q&A, so I'm going to dive into those right now. The first question that someone had asked was more tips for letting go of creamer in your coffee. And the very first thing I would encourage you to ask yourself, for anyone who's looking to reduce creamer or to make any changes in their eating habits in general, is ask yourself why you're wanting to make that change in the first place. I think it's very common for us to be really influenced by friends or family or just social media when we see messages out there about food, and they can be mixed messages, and we automatically assume we have to make changes with our own eating habits when we hear some of these messages, and a lot of times don't even consider if the message resonates with us or actually makes sense for our life. So I really encourage you, again, if you're looking to make any changes, such as this specific one of letting go or reducing creamer in your coffee, again, ask yourself why you're doing it. If it's just because you were influenced or you heard something online or from a friend, family member, just, again, ask if it really lines up with your life. And then if there's other reasons you're wanting to limit your creamer consumption, because maybe you are having more creamer in your coffee than actual coffee, or maybe you got some recent blood work done and your cholesterol levels are a little bit higher, so you want to work on improving those. There can be different reasons for wanting to, again, limit your your creamer in your coffee. So again, just ask yourself why you're doing that and make sure it really lines up with your goals and your values. And then that can help you take the next step in being really realistic in how you want to go about reducing it. So again, let's say you, again, find yourself using more creamer in your coffee than actual coffee. So that's the reason that you're wanting to limit it. So what you can do is gradually work on decreasing it. So maybe right now you do about 50% creamer and 50% coffee, or 75% creamer and 25% coffee. So over the next week or two, you decide you're going to gradually decrease and do 25% creamer and 75% coffee in your mug. Or maybe you're going to do again, maybe 50 to 50% if you were at a higher ratio. Again, it's really just being realistic about where you are personally at and making gradual changes versus cutting it cold turkey. For most people, this doesn't work, or it doesn't end up being sustainable. So that's why I say just be realistic with where you're at and cut back gradually, and then get used to where you start to cut back first before you continue to cut back. So again, if you start by reducing your creamer by 25% the first week, you get used to that for a couple weeks before you continue to reduce until you get to that spot where you feel comfortable and you're where you want to be with your coffee to creamer ratio. Other tips, if you're, again, wanting to make swaps with your coffee creamer, you can always swap to a plant-based creamer instead. Again, especially if you're someone who's looking to improve cholesterol levels. A lot of the times in dairy-based creamers, there tends to be more saturated fat, which can raise your cholesterol levels. And in most plant-based creamers, not all of them, but most of them, they're going to have more unsaturated fat versus saturated, which can be better for your good cholesterol and lowering the bad cholesterol. So can think about it in that way. Again, if your goal is to improve cholesterol levels, swap to maybe a plant-based creamer, or again, just reducing it can still be beneficial. And maybe even looking for homemade online recipes. I know that there are a lot of homemade creamers. If that's something you enjoy, you have a bit more control over the ingredients that are going over it, you can go about it in that way too. But that's why I really encourage you to start with figuring out why you're wanting to make the change in the first place before you go about actually making the change and reducing your coffee creamer. So again, you can pick the best option or way to go when it comes to making that change. So hopefully that helps. Again, I know that was mainly specifically for reducing coffee creamer, but hopefully you can apply some of that to any changes you might want to make with your nutrition habits. And going into the second question was, how does one recover from an eating disorder and practice best balance with intuitive eating without falling into old patterns? I think this is a really great question because it's very common for someone who's navigating leaving it or healing from an eating disorder and practicing intuitive eating to help them do this, and where they will find themselves falling into those old eating patterns. So really important, I would say, first and foremost, to just get support, especially, again, with an eating disorder. It can feel very lonely and isolating, and you can feel like there's something wrong with you, and like, again, there's something wrong with you, and really it's a mental health condition, and it's very common in getting support, whether that be personalized support from a therapist or a dietitian, or group support from a Facebook group, or just people that you trust. It's really important, again, because that can help you feel less lonely, less isolated, and also having other people to lean on can make you realize that the experiences you're going through are very common, and a lot of people are probably struggling in the same way that you are, and can help you and give you support and give you tips and tools that have maybe helped them to see if this helps you. So again, number one tip for navigating an eating disorder and practicing intuitive eating is get support. Again, personal support, group support, maybe it's a book you read, whatever the case may be. Again, figure out what works for you, but get that support. Don't do it on your own. And understand that intuitive eating is a process. It takes time, and think about also, how long have you had your eating disorder, or how long have you struggled with disordered eating patterns? For most people, it's been years. It's not going to take a month or 2 months to unlearn everything that you've learned throughout your life and jump into intuitive eating. It's going to take time. It's a process. And I think understanding that it's a process, and that it's also something that you are going to have to trial and error or experiment a lot with. And there's no failing, or there's no doing anything wrong with intuitive eating. I think that's when people fall back into their old patterns, is when they feel like they're doing it wrong. Just remember, there is no failing, there is no doing intuitive eating wrong. There is set pillars and tools that can help you implement it and help you practice it in a way that feels best for you and your lifestyle. But in the beginning, again, it's trial and error, and you're not doing anything wrong or failing unless you completely give up on it. So practice again, and understand that it's more of an experiment for you in figuring out what works best for you, rather than having an end goal, or again, feeling like you're doing something wrong, because you're really not. There's no mistakes, only things that you can learn from and help yourself do better. So I just want to give you a real life example with that before I wrap up with this question. I see very often with eating disorders and practicing intuitive eating this hard time with navigating overeating or binge eating and finding a way to feel more balanced and in control around food. And a lot of times with people, again, practicing eating disorders in the beginning, or practicing intuitive eating in the beginning, can feel like if they do end up overeating or binge eating after they've made some progress, they're doing something wrong. And a lot of times I'll see people fall back into their dieting patterns to help them feel more in control, when in reality it's just going to, again, probably set them back more by doing this. So in the specific example, if you do find yourself with intuitive eating in the beginning, still struggling with binge eating and overeating, again, understand it's a process. It's going to take time. And instead of going back to your old patterns, try to put the pieces together of why maybe that binge or the overeating occurred. So maybe you were really busy at work that day, you skipped lunch, or you ate it really fast. So later on, your body's really making up for what you missed on earlier on in the day, and that's why the binging or overeating is occurring. So navigating, again, what's going on in your intuitive eating experience with that observational or that experimental mindset, so that you can learn from it, and in the future you can make the changes that are going to help you in this specific example, not overeat. So maybe the next day you're going to be more mindful while you're eating lunch, or you're going to prioritize making sure that you eat it, or don't skip any meals in general, so that you can hopefully fall back into a normal pattern and the overeating or binging doesn't continue. So hopefully that helps you get a real life example as well of how to, again, navigate eating disorders and intuitive eating and not feeling like you're falling back into your old patterns. It does take time. It does take support. And I have a really great intuitive eating for beginners guide. If anyone is interested, I will share the link for that in my stories after this, and I will share it in the post after this as well. So if anyone's interested in learning more about intuitive eating and navigating eating disorders without falling back into your old dieting patterns, that can be a really great guide to get to help you get support through it. And lastly, before I wrap up, for the month of March, I have created a balanced and satisfying meal checklist for anyone who just wants to understand better how to create more balanced and satisfying meals. Is completely free, downloadable for you. I will also share that in my stories after this and in the post. So if you're interested in downloading the balanced and satisfying meal checklist, you can get access to that again after this, and I'll share it throughout the entire month of March. And that was it for the March round of the monthly Friday Q&A. Thank you so much for joining, asking questions. For the April Q&A, you can ask me any questions. You can just send me the question in my DMs, and I will save them for the April Q&A or the next one. And then I also will always post on the Wednesday before a question box, so you can enter your questions there, and I'll answer them on the next Friday Q&A. Again, thanks so much for joining. See you again in April.